Jason Reynolds stood at the checkout line, gripping his wallet a little too tightly. His 7-year-old daughter, Anna, clung to his side, shifting her weight from one foot to the other while humming quietly. The grocery conveyor belt carried their modest selection: forward milk, bread, eggs, a couple of apples, and a pack of store-brand cereal. Every item had been carefully chosen, each purchase weighed against what was left in his bank account. The cashier, an older man with tired eyes, scanned Jason's items at a steady pace. Jason did a quick mental calculation: $23.45. He had that much. Barely. His paycheck from the auto shop had been smaller than expected this week, and rent was due in 5 days. He exhaled slowly, keeping his face neutral for Anna's sake. But just as he reached for his card, the woman in front of him let out a frustrated sigh. Jason glanced up. She was well-dressed tan slacks, a crisp white blouse, and an expensive-looking leather purse slung over her shoulder. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, and she had the kind of presence that made her seem important, like someone used to having things go smoothly. The cashier gave her a sympathetic look. "Ma'am, it says your card's declined." The woman frowned. "That's impossible. I used it earlier today." Jason watched as she tried again. Same result. She checked her phone, muttering something under her breath. "Great. Bank probably flagged it for security." She hesitated, glancing at the total on the register. $24.78. Jason saw the hesitation in her eyes. She could probably afford this 10 times over, but at this moment, she was stuck. He knew the feeling. He shifted his weight, glancing down at Anna, who was now watching the woman curiously. Jason hesitated. It wasn't like he had money to spare, but he knew what it felt like to be stuck at a register with no options. Before he could second-guess himself, Jason stepped forward and pulled out a worn $20 bill and a 5 from his wallet. He slid it onto the counter. "I got it." The woman turned to him, her blue eyes widening. "Oh no, It's fine," Jason said quickly, not wanting to make it a big deal. "Happens to the best of us." She hesitated again. "Are you sure I can?" "Yeah," Jason cut in, forcing a small smile. "Really, just pay it forward someday." The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure something out. Then, finally, she gave a slow nod. "Thank you, I appreciate it." The cashier made the change, handing her the receipt. She took her bags, pausing just before leaving. "What's your name?" "Jason," he said simply. She gave him a small, thoughtful smile. "I'm Rebecca." Then she hesitated again, glancing at Anna. "And your daughter?" "Anna," Jason said, resting a hand on his little girl's shoulder. Rebecca nodded. "Thank you, Jason, really." And with that, she was gone. Jason turned back to his own groceries. He did a quick recalculation in his head. He was going to be short. He had just barely enough before, but now. The cashier must have noticed his pause because he gave Jason a knowing look. "I can put something back if you need me to." Jason swallowed. His pride screamed at him, but he knew better than to let it get in the way of reality. "Yeah, maybe the apples." Before the cashier could remove them, Anna tugged at Jason's sleeve. "Daddy, can we keep them? You like apples." Jason hesitated. "Sweetheart, we have to make sure we have enough for." "I have my piggy bank money," she announced. "I can help." Jason's chest tightened. He forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "That's really sweet, kiddo, but that's your money." "But you always say we help people when we can," she said stubbornly, puffing out her little chest. "You helped the lady, I can help you." Jason exhaled, feeling his heart ache a little. "You're a good kid, you know that." Anna beamed. "I know." The cashier, smiling slightly, rang up the rest. Jason paid, barely scraping by, and they left the store with their modest haul. As they walked toward the car, Jason glanced down at Anna, who was swinging her bag happily. "You really didn't have to do that, you know." She shrugged. You always say being nice is more important than money. Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head. Guess I do say that. They got into the car, and Jason sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He was going to have to figure out how to stretch his paycheck until rent was due. But for some reason, as he looked at Anna happily munching on an apple in the backseat, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little lighter. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to change everything. Jason didn't think much about the woman from the grocery store after that day. His mind was too occupied with more pressing concerns: rent, bills, and making sure Anna never felt the weight of his struggles. She was too young to worry about things like overdue notices and empty bank accounts. That was his burden to bear, not hers. The next few days passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. Jason spent his mornings under the hood of cars at the auto shop, his hands stained with grease, his back aching from long hours. The job paid, but not nearly enough to keep up with rising costs. Every dollar was stretched thin, and with Anna growing fast, there was always something new. She needed shoes, school supplies, or just a little treat now, and then to keep her childhood bright. One evening, after picking Anna up from school, Jason drove home in silence, his thoughts heavy. Rent was due in 2 days. He had most of it, but not all. He'd have to figure something out. Maybe pick up an extra shift, sell something, or just pray for a little luck. Anna, sitting in the backseat, kicked her legs idly. Daddy. Yeah, sweetheart. Did you know apples are good for your heart? Jason smiled despite his worries. That's so. Yep, she nodded enthusiastically. Ms. Carter said so in class. She also said being kind is good for your heart too. Jason glanced at her in the rearview mirror. That's a smart teacher you got. Anna grinned. I like her. She tells funny jokes. Jason chuckled softly, shaking his head. For all the stress in his life, Anna was his constant source of light. She had a way of making even the hardest days feel a little less impossible. When they got home, Jason checked the mail out of habit. Bills, as expected. He sighed, flipping through them. Just as he was about to toss them onto the kitchen table, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated. Normally, he ignored calls from numbers he didn't recognize, probably telemarketers or another bill collector. But something made him pick up this time. Hello. Jason, the voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it right away. It's Rebecca, from the grocery store. Jason blinked in surprise. Oh, hey. I hope I'm not bothering you, she said quickly. I wanted to thank you again for what you did the other day. Jason leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me, Rebecca said. There was a pause. You didn't have to do that, and I could tell. You weren't exactly in the best position to help, but you did anyway. Jason didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't the kind of guy who did things for recognition. He just saw someone who needed a little help, and he did what he could. That was it. Rebecca continued, I asked around about you. Jason tensed, asked around. I ran into one of your coworkers at the auto shop, she admitted. I needed some work done on my car, and I recognized the shop's name on your uniform. I wanted to know more about the guy who helped me out. Jason exhaled slowly. Look, if you're calling to pay me back or something, you don't have to. It was $20, not a big deal. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That's not why I'm calling. Jason waited. I run a small business, she finally said. Nothing huge, but it does well. And I've been looking for someone reliable to help manage deliveries and logistics. My usual guy left a few months ago, and I've been struggling to find someone I trust. Jason frowned, unsure where this was going. Okay. I want to offer you a job, Jason. Jason's breath caught in his throat. What? It pays well, Rebecca continued. Better than what you're making now, and it comes with benefits. Jason's mind was spinning. This didn't make sense. You don't even know me. Rebecca laughed softly. I know enough. I know you're the kind of person who helps a stranger even when you don't have much yourself. I know you work hard. And I know you have a daughter who adores you. Jason swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Jason hesitated. This was too much, too fast. He wasn't the kind of guy who got lucky breaks like this. It felt surreal. I'll think about it, he finally said. Rebecca seemed satisfied with that. Good, I'll send you the details. And Jason? Yeah. I meant what I said. You helped me when you didn't have to. Let me return the favor. After the call ended, Jason stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. Could this really be happening? Anna peeked into the kitchen. Daddy. Jason looked up, still dazed. Yeah, baby. Why do you look funny? Jason let out a breathless laugh. Just got some news. Good news. He looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, and realized maybe, just maybe things were about to change for the better. Yeah, sweetheart, he said, scooping her up into a hug. Really good news. Jason barely slept that night. His mind raced with possibilities, doubts, and cautious hope. He'd been struggling for so long that the idea of something finally going right felt almost foreign. Could he really take this job? Could he trust that it was real? The next morning, after dropping Anna off at school, Jason sat in his car outside his apartment, staring at his phone. Rebecca had sent him the job details overnight. Salary, benefits, responsibilities. It was real. And it was more money than he'd ever made in his life. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. It almost felt too good. Like one of those scams where they lure you in with promises, only to pull the rug out from under you. But Rebecca didn't seem like that kind of person, and she hadn't asked for anything in return. Jason exhaled. He needed to talk to her. He called before he could second-guess himself. She picked up on the second ring. Jason. Hey, he ran a hand through his hair. I got your message. Good, he could hear the smile in her voice. What do you think? I think it sounds too good to be true. Rebecca chuckled. I get that, but it's real, and I meant what I said. Jason hesitated. Why me? Because I trust my instincts, she said simply. And my instincts tell me you're exactly the kind of person I want working for me. Jason swallowed. His whole life, he'd been scraping by, taking whatever jobs he could find just to survive. No one had ever offered him something like this. No one had ever looked at him and thought he was worth more. All right, he said finally, I'll do it. There was a pause, then Rebecca laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. They arranged to meet at her office that afternoon. Jason spent the rest of the morning at the auto shop, finishing up his last shift. His boss, a gruff but decent man named Mike, clapped him on the shoulder when he told him he was leaving. Good for you, kid, Mike said. You're a hard worker, you deserve a break. Jason nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. Thanks, Mike. By the time he arrived at Rebecca's office, his stomach was in knots. The building wasn't huge, but it was modern and well-kept. He stepped inside, feeling out of place in his worn jeans and oil-stained jacket. Rebecca greeted him with a warm smile. Jason, glad you came. He nodded, shaking her hand. Thanks for having me. She led him into a conference room and went over everything in detail. The job was straightforward, overseeing deliveries, managing schedules, making sure things ran smoothly. It was work he could handle. Work he could actually build a future on. And the salary. It was more than double what he'd been making at the shop. When they finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair. So, what do you think? Jason let out a slow breath. I think this could change my life. Rebecca smiled. That's the idea. Jason started the job the next week. The transition wasn't easy, there was a lot to learn, and he had to adjust to a whole new routine, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just treading water. He could finally breathe. And most importantly, Anna wouldn't have to see him struggling anymore. A month passed, then two. The money was steady. The bills were paid on time. Jason even managed to start saving a little something he hadn't been able to do in years. One evening, as he and Anna sat on the couch watching cartoons, she turned to him suddenly. "You smile more now," she said matter-of-factly. Jason blinked. "What?" "You used to look sad a lot," she said, swinging her legs, "but now you smile more." Jason felt a lump in his throat. He pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's because things are getting better, sweetheart." She grinned. "I like it." Jason exhaled, holding her close. For the first time in a long, long time. He liked it too. Jason settled into his new job faster than he expected. The learning curve was steep at first, but Rebecca was patient, and his natural work ethic carried him through. He spent his mornings organizing deliveries, making sure shipments arrived on time, and handling any logistical hiccups that came up during the day. It was busy work, but it was steady, honest, and most importantly, it paid well. For the first time in years, Jason felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was finally moving forward. The difference in his life was noticeable almost immediately. Rent was no longer a looming threat. The fridge stayed full. The collection of overdue bills that had once cluttered his kitchen counter was now gone. Paid. More than anything, Anna noticed the change. She still had the same bright energy, the same boundless enthusiasm for the little things in life: apples, bedtime stories, her favorite cartoons, but now there was something else. A quiet ease. She didn't hear Jason sigh as often. She didn't catch him rubbing his temples at the table, staring at a pile of bills, and most of all, she didn't see that tired sadness in his eyes anymore. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, she curled up beside him and looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy." "Yeah, sweetheart." She hesitated, kicking her little feet against the couch cushion. "Are we rich now?" Jason laughed, shaking his head. "Not quite, kiddo." "But we have more money now, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, we do." Anna considered this for a moment. Then, in the most serious voice a 7-year-old could muster, she said, "Do we have enough to buy a castle?" Jason chuckled. "Not even close." Anna sighed dramatically. "That's okay. I think I'd get lost in a castle anyway." Jason ruffled her hair. "You're probably right." Anna was quiet for a moment, then she looked up at him again. "Can we do nice things for people now, like you did for the lady at the store?" Jason's chest tightened. He wasn't sure why, but the question hit him hard. He thought back to that day at the grocery store, how he'd barely had enough for his own groceries, how he'd hesitated before handing over that 20. It had been a small act of kindness, but it had changed everything. Maybe Anna was right. Maybe it was time to pass that kindness along again. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. A few days later, Jason stopped by a local diner for lunch. It was one of those small, old-fashioned places that still had checkered floors and a jukebox in the corner. The kind of place where the waitresses called you "hun" and kept your coffee cup full without asking. Jason had just finished his meal when he overheard a conversation at the counter. An older man, probably in his 70s, with thinning white hair and a worn-out jacket, was talking to the waitress in a low, embarrassed voice. "Are you sure?" The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, leaned in slightly. "I can talk to the manager, maybe work something out." The old man shook his head, gripping his wallet. No, I thought I had enough. Jason watched as the man pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket, counting them slowly. His hands shook slightly, and his face was red with quiet shame. Jason didn't think. He just stood up, walked to the counter, and handed the waitress a 20. Cover his meal, he said simply. The waitress blinked in surprise. Oh, hun, you don't have to. I want to, Jason said. The old man looked up at him, his watery blue eyes filled with something Jason recognized all too well, pride battling against gratitude. I can pay you back, the man said, his voice rough. Jason shook his head. Just pay it forward someday. The old man stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Jason didn't wait for more. He simply smiled, tipped his hat slightly, and walked out. As he stepped into the cool afternoon air, he felt something light settle in his chest. Anna had been right. It felt good to help, just for the sake of helping. And maybe, just maybe, that kindness would come back around again someday. A week passed, then another. Life settled into a rhythm Jason never thought he'd have. The kind where he wasn't constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next crisis. Anna was happier. That was what mattered most. She laughed more freely, without that quiet, unspoken worry that had once lingered in her eyes. Jason knew she'd noticed the struggles before, even when he tried to shield her from them. She was smart. Too smart sometimes, but now she didn't have to worry anymore. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Anna curled up beside him, her tiny fingers playing with the fabric of his shirt. Daddy. Yeah, sweetheart. She hesitated, then looked up at him with those big, thoughtful eyes. Are we still gonna help people? Jason smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Of course we are. Anna grinned, satisfied. Good, 'cause it makes people happy. Jason chuckled. Yeah, it does. The next morning, Jason pulled into work, sipping his coffee as he stepped inside. He was settling into the job well. The work was busy but manageable, and Rebecca had been nothing but supportive. They developed an easy rhythm, one built on mutual respect. She trusted him, and for the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he was in a place where he belonged. As he walked into his office, he found Rebecca already there, leaning against the desk with a knowing smile. You're early, Jason said, raising an eyebrow. I wanted to talk to you, she said, arms crossed, about something important. Jason set his coffee down. Sounds serious. Rebecca smirked. It is, she straightened. I've been watching you these past few months, Jason. You've done more than I expected. You didn't just take the job, you made it better. You've streamlined deliveries, fixed scheduling issues, and even handled customer complaints better than I ever did. Jason shrugged, a little embarrassed. Just doing my job. Rebecca shook her head. No, you're doing more than that. She took a breath. I want to promote you. Jason blinked. What? I want you to manage operations, she said simply. Full control, bigger salary, more responsibility. Jason stared at her, his brain struggling to catch up. Rebecca, that's huge. She nodded. I know. I don't even know if I'm qualified for that. Rebecca tilted her head. Did you know if you were qualified for this job when I offered it to you? Jason hesitated. You figured it out, she continued, and you'll figure this out too. Jason exhaled slowly. It was overwhelming. Just a few months ago, he was barely scraping by, counting pennies at the grocery store. Now, this. Take the weekend to think about it, Rebecca said, sensing his hesitation. But Jason, you've earned this. Jason nodded, his mind still spinning. That night, as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the job offer Rebecca had emailed him, Anna climbed into the chair beside him. What are you thinking about? she asked, swinging her legs. Jason rubbed his jaw. A new job offer. Anna's eyes widened. A new job. Not a new job, Jason clarified, just a bigger one. Anna considered this, then tilted her head. Do you want to do it? Jason hesitated. I don't know. Anna frowned. Why not? Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because it's a lot of responsibility, and I don't want to mess it up. Anna was quiet for a moment. Then, with all the wisdom of a 7-year-old, she said, But you always tell me to try my best, even if something's scary. Jason looked at her, startled. Anna nodded seriously, like she'd just given the most important advice in the world. So you should do it, and if it's hard, just try your best. Jason exhaled, a slow smile spreading across his face. You're a smart kid, you know that. Anna grinned. I know. The next morning, Jason walked into Rebecca's office and shook her hand. I'm in, he said. Rebecca smiled. I knew you would be. Life kept moving. The struggles weren't gone. Jason knew they never would be completely. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was building something, for himself, for Anna, for their future. And maybe, just maybe, all of it had started with that $20 bill in the grocery store. Funny how life worked that way.